All right, so now we're going to talk about Django models, which give us a way to store data and really adds a lot of that full stack app power. And before we dive into what models are exactly, we're going to look at them through the lens of our pizza example here, a restaurant example. And so we can think that so far we've just been receiving a blank pizza. And that's because the chef doesn't know where any of the ingredients or recipes are located. He just has access to the dough that's in front of him. And we can imagine that all of the recipes are stored somewhere in like the back of the kitchen in a freezer or a fridge. And so in order to actually use them when the chef prepares your pizza, he has to know where they're at and how to go get them, how to store them. And then once he has access to those ingredients, he can go ahead and make your favorite pizza, your special pizza. And we can also think of another example. If you wanted to save this recipe and think every time you come into this restaurant, you want to say, "Hey chef, make me my special pizza." Well, he has to somehow remember what that pizza is. And so he would have to write that information down on like a pad and then remember that and put that somewhere where he can find it. So without having access to all of these other items, the chef doesn't have the ability to make a complex special pizza for you. And that's kind of how models work within our Django project. And so before we dive into models themselves, I want to go over how our Django projects have been working so far. So far it all starts with a user that's on your site that types in an address into the browser. So it might be like going to localhost 8000/about or the homepage so far, or if it was on a server, it would be like going to mysite.com/about or mysite.com/ for the home route. And then that request gets sent over to the urls.py file that checks all of the paths and says, hey, we found a match. So let's say we're going to the home route that lists out all of our favorite movies. The URL says, hey, I found a match. Let me go ahead and call that view function that's associated with that URL. So in this case, it's the movies function, the movies view that grabs all of your favorite movies and then returns a template that lists out your favorite movies. And so that's all good. But the only problem is that we're hard coding all of those favorite movies in the view. So if you go to this home route, you'll get a list of favorite movies. And if I go to that same route, I'll get the same list of favorite movies. And that doesn't really make sense because we shouldn't have the exact same list of favorite movies. And so that's where models come into play. And models are just Python classes. So whenever you make a project or app, you will also get a models.py file. But it gives us a way to interact with a database where we can store information. So in order to keep track of my favorite movies and your favorite movies, we would have to use a database. And instead of having to write SQL or some kind of database query language to interact with the database, Django gives us this nice Pythonic way to interact with the data called models. And so the view can interact with the models to get all of our favorite movies, all of your favorite movies, or all of my favorite movies, depending on who is sending the request. And then the model will interact with the database to get that information, send it back to the view, and then the view can send that to the template. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what models are exactly. So we already know that each model is a Python class, so it's just a Python class. And each model represents a database table. So typically when you're working with Django, you'll work with relational databases. And so they store data in tables, and then these tables can be related to one another. So a model, each Python class, represents a database table. And then each attribute on this Python class, each variable on that class, is a field in the table. So we can think about this first row as being a row of the fields. So this would be a field, and a field. And each attribute on the Python class, on this model class, is a field in that table. So now let's look at an actual example with our favorite movies. So this is what our models.py file could look like. This is models.py. It automatically is generated when we create a project or app. And the first line here gets auto-imported by Django. It's from django.db import models. So this just imports this models module, this models Python file. And then down here, we actually create a model. So it's just a Python class, so class, and then we name it whatever we want the table to be named. So this is a list of our movies, so we call it movie. And then it inherits from models.model. So this is the model class within this models module that we imported up here. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, but hopefully you're following along. This is the models module that we imported up here, and then we're importing the model class, and we're inheriting from that, so we get all of the functionality. And then we're defining title as an attribute on this class, and so this will be a field in that table. And now we have to specify what type of field it will be. And so again, from that models module, we have access to a lot of different field types. The Django docs list them all out. This is character field, which is like a shorter text. There's also text field for longer text, integers. There's tons of fields to check out. And then you can also pass in arguments. So when you're using the char field, we have to specify the max length. And so this models.py file right here in this class will create this movie table. So we can see up here, it's called movie because that's what we called this class. And then we have two fields. Now we specify this title field here, and we can see that we have this title field, but we also have this ID field that we didn't specify. And that's because whenever you create a model, whenever you create a table, it will automatically create the ID field and auto-generate and auto-increment the values. And this is so that you can have a unique kind of identifier for each value in the table. So it automatically creates ID, and then it starts with 1 and auto-increments them. And then we also have our title field that we specified, and then we filled in some data for our favorite movies. And so now we would be able to save separate data for my favorite movies and your favorite movies. And within the view, we could interact with this models.py file and this table here and actually get the data from this table, from this database, instead of having to hard code it in the view. Amazing. So now we know more about how models work and how we can use them to interact with the database. Let's dive in and get our project set up.